Okay, so I assume you could see the screen, the PDF file.
Yes, Bhante.
Okay, so let us begin. We'll start with 3 bows to the Buddha. 1. And then the salutation. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so good morning, everybody. And today is May 21st. And so we are over the so-called hump of the Vesak season, at least the main Vesak celebrations, though some will continue probably till the end of May. Okay, when I was planning for today's class, I thought that we would skip from the sutta we did last time, which was what, number 200. And I thought we would jump over all of these suttas in between up to Sutta Book of Fours, number 233, thinking, oh, this material in between these suttas, starting from 201 to 232, I think, are just standard material that everybody knows about, very simple, very elementary. But then early this morning, I was just sort of skimming over this material, and it occurred to me, wow, this is really important stuff, even though it's quite basic and somewhat schematic. But it's a kind of material that we really should get acquainted with and know and sort of absorb it into our own minds and hearts and even embody it within our lives. And so we can't just sort of pass over this material thinking that it's too elementary, too basic, because these little suttas are dealing with the distinctions, the very important distinctions between what it means to be a bad person and a good person, what it means to be a really bad person and an exceptionally good person. And so these suttas are dealing with very fundamental schemes of ethical training, moral training, the molding and shaping of our characters. And so what strikes me here in the West, when people get interested in Buddhism, they immediately identify Buddhism with mindfulness and meditation and think that to be a dedicated Buddhist means you plunge directly into intensive meditation practice, aiming to reach this attainment, that attainment, and then you start talking, oh, I got this, I got that, or you feel dejected, I didn't get this, I didn't get that, or you start eavesdropping when other people are talking, oh, he got the first jhana. First jhana, that's nothing. I got the third jhana. Oh, that's nothing. I got stream entry. I got once returning. I got non-returning. And I even heard this past week that there are a few lay people going around saying, I'm an arahat. I reached arhatship. And still living what seems to be very ordinary lay life. But somehow people get these exceptional experiences in meditation, which they then identify with world transcending attainments. And in some cases, one seems to suspect that they're lacking even some of the fundamental moral groundwork, which in my view is essential for these higher attainments. Okay, so let us look at some of these suttas, and we'll be going through them quickly, not devoting a lot of time to each one individually. But we could see, even when we start off with the first paragraph in the first sutta, that the Buddha makes an interesting fourfold distinction here. We have, on the one hand, a bad person, and then we have the person who is worse than the bad person. And even that distinction is quite important, because you can be a bad person. It's a fair, if you're going to be a bad person, it's enough to be a bad person, but don't strive to be a person who's worse than the bad person. And then we have next the distinction between the good person and the one who's better than the good person. So you should at least strive to be a good person, but don't be satisfied with that, but strive to be even better than an ordinary good person. So how does one go about that? Okay, so the bad person is one who violates the ethical principles embedded within the five precepts. So one who kills, in other words, destroys life, who steals, taking what is not given, who engages in various kinds of sexual misconduct, adultery, seduction of minors, forced sexual relations, and so on, who deliberately tells lies, speaking falsely, and who indulges in intoxicants. So that's the transgression of the five precepts. And if one consistently transgresses, consciously, deliberately, persistently transgresses these basic ethical principles, then one is called a bad person. Okay, and maybe I'll take that question later. Okay, so then how is one worse than a bad person? So this is sort of getting really low. So someone himself destroys life and persuades others to destroy life, and so on for each of the other four ethical principles. He steals and encourages others to steal, engages in sexual misconduct, encourages others to do that, speaks lies, encourages others to lie, uses intoxicants, and encourages others to use intoxicants. So that's how you become a really bad person. So you're not content just to violate the basic ethical principles oneself, but one wants to pull others down into the pit of one's own transgressions, to drag one down along with oneself. Okay, so then the next is who is the good person? Yeah, and I think it's quite important to recognize that, yeah, okay, first the term that's rendered as good person, the Pali word is sapurisa, which is derived from sat plus purisa. And the word sat comes from the verb ati, which means to be. And so from the word sat, we also get the word satya, which you can see more clearly in Sanskrit, satya, as truth, reality, what is real, what is true. And so the sapurisa is both a person who is ethically good, but also we could say a true person in the sense of being a person of moral integrity, a person whose conduct accords with the true principle of the universe, or at least the principles which are essential sort of to keep the universe functioning. The underlying system of laws that sustain the universe is one of the meanings of the word Dhamma. So the Dhamma, we could say, is the cosmic and moral order. Oops. Sorry. Okay, so Dhamma, we could say one of its senses is the cosmic and moral order. And then those principles that are based on this cosmic or moral order are satya, satya or truth. And so a person whose conduct conforms to the cosmic moral order is a person who acts in accordance with, you could say, with moral truth. And that is a sapurisa, who is, you could say, is both a good person and a true person. And the minimal standard for the good person is observing, acting in accordance with these 5 ethical principles: abstaining from killing, from stealing, from sexual misconduct, abstaining from deliberately telling a lie, and abstaining from the use of intoxicants. And actually, of these 5 principles, what I would say is that the first 4 are the proper ethical principles in their own right. Those are sort of universal ethical principles. Abstaining from toxicants, or let's say the use of intoxicants, is not itself a moral transgression. And abstaining from the use of intoxicants in itself is not a moral virtue, an inherent moral virtue. But the Buddha takes a practical perspective when laying down this moral code. And so he recognized that the use of intoxicants, particularly liquors and wine, dull and deaden a person's moral sense. They deaden the voice of conscience. So if a person uses intoxicants, then it's likely, or it's very possible, that they'll then easily go astray and transgress against the fundamental ethical principles. So as a practical measure, the Buddha included abstaining from the use of intoxicants in the 5 precepts, but they're not included, well, this principle is not included in the 10 courses of wholesome action, because the use of intoxicants in itself does not generate unwholesome karma, or at least not generate strong unwholesome karma. But if you use intoxicants, then it weakens the moral sense. And so if one is not very careful, one could step over the boundary and fall into the pitfalls of moral transgression. Okay, so to be a good person, at minimum, one strives to observe these 5 ethical principles expressed in the 5 precepts. But to be a superior follower of the Buddha's teaching, to be a superior good person, one doesn't only observe the 5 training rules oneself, but one encourages others to do them. One encourages others to avoid killing, to avoid stealing, to avoid sexual misconduct, to avoid telling lies, to avoid the use of intoxicants. And then one becomes a person superior to the good person. One becomes truly a superior person. Okay, so this, maybe I should just elaborate a little bit. So we have these 5 ethical principles here expressed somewhat in negative terms as abstaining from this, abstaining from that. But this doesn't mean that to be a truly ethical person, to be an ethical person in the higher sense, that it's just enough to observe these principles of abstinence. I think the Buddha, again, taking a practical standpoint, lays down the principles of abstinence as the minimal standard, because he recognizes that before you can really cultivate the excellent qualities of the heart, you have to clear the ground by avoiding actions that entail moral transgression. And so I compare this to somebody who has a piece of land, plot of land, and they want to develop a garden, to cultivate a beautiful flower garden, or maybe a varied garden with flowers, bushes, some trees on that plot of land. Yet the land is overrun by weeds, by brambles. And so what does the person do? By bushes with thorns. And so what does the person do? They don't start off just by planting the seeds of the flowers and the fruit trees, but they have to clear the land, remove the weeds, remove the bushes, the tangle of bushes, and then they have to till the soil and maybe put in some fertilizer and prepare good soil. Then they can plant the seeds of flower seeds, and the trees and the flowers and trees will grow up strong and healthy. And so as the basis for developing a moral life, one observes the 5 principles of abstinence, but on top of this, one also tries to cultivate the corresponding virtues. So instead of killing and destroying life or inflicting physical violence on others, then one develops kindness and compassion, daya, and karuna and metta. Instead of stealing, taking what is not given, one develops like virtues like honesty and contentment. Instead of engaging in sexual misconduct, if one is in a relationship, one remains faithful within that relationship. And if one is a monastic, one tries to observe celibacy. And then abstaining, instead of just abstaining from telling lies, one tries to cultivate a commitment to truth, to truthfulness, to honesty in speech. And rather than indulge in intoxicants, then one maintains sobriety and tries to develop ever stronger sati sampajanya, mindfulness and clear comprehension, clear understanding. Okay, so this would be the first of these short suttas on the ethical life. So maybe if there are any questions that arise from this, we could take them now. And as usual, if to ask a question, you go. Yeah, I don't see the same bottom line that you have on your panel. Does it have a question box, a question option? Or the raise hand option? If not, then you go to the reactions, and in the reactions, if you click that button, then a menu will drop down, and then one of the menus is the hand symbol. Okay, so let us see if there's any hands. Okay, Sumana.
Thank you, Bante. Bante, for the right speech, I don't understand whether when one say the truth, but it's harsh. It's a harsh speech.
Okay.
But it's a truth. Is that?
Yeah, actually, that's a very good question. Very good question. Yeah, and there's an interesting sutta that has a relationship to that question. It's in the Majjhima Nikaya, I think it's sutta number 59. It's on the kind of speech that the Buddha himself uses. And the Buddha makes a distinction first between speech which is beneficial to others and speech which is harmful to others or not beneficial to others. And the speech of the Buddha will always be beneficial to others. The Buddha will never speak words that are worthless, valueless, pointless, or harmful to others. But then in the speech that's beneficial to others, the Buddha makes a distinction: speech that might be agreeable to others and disagreeable to others. And here the Buddha says, when it's the right occasion, I'll speak words that are beneficial and agreeable to others. But when it's the right occasion, I'll also speak words that are beneficial to others, but disagreeable to them. And so when you're trying to observe right speech, actually that principle of avoiding harsh speech comes later, not in the 5 precepts, but in the 10 ways of wholesome action. When you're trying to avoid harsh speech, generally you'll make an effort to speak in ways that are agreeable to others, but sometimes it's necessary to speak in ways that are disagreeable to others. So whether the speech is harsh or not, you could say 2 criteria. One is the nature of the statement itself, and the other criterion is the state of mind from which the statement emerges. And so the word, the statement itself, you might say is harsh speech because it's disagreeable to others. But if the statement comes out of a compassionate concern for the well-being of the other person, then technically it's not harsh speech. Though the other person perceives it as being harsh, that's their problem. But you are speaking these words with good intention. Your purpose is to help that person, we could say, emerge from the unwholesome and get settled in the wholesome. You're trying to help that person maybe correct their conduct or correct their attitude, correct their way of thinking. So if that person thinks you're being harsh to me, that's the other person's perception. But if you're doing this not from anger, not from ill will, but with a good intention, then technically it's not harsh speech. Yeah, I remember even when I was a novice monk back many, many years ago in Sri Lanka, my teacher, my ordination teacher, the Venerable Balangodananda Maitreya, sometimes we would come into his kuti, into his hut for a Dharma lesson, and he would see that the room hadn't been cleaned up. So he would turn to his novice attendant and say, "Why didn't you clean up the room? You're out there playing with your friends and the room is still a mess." Yeah, but he's not, you know, right after right after he speaks like that to the novice, then he turns to me and he starts chuckling and says, "You have to train these novices, otherwise they're just going to go on playing and playing and playing." Yeah, so the way he spoke, if you look at it without understanding, it seems like he's speaking harshly, but we know that he's doing that from a good intention. Okay, does that answer the question?
Thank you so much, Bante.
Okay, let's see. Oh, wow, a lot of questions have come up, or at least several. So, Aili Tan.
Hello, Bante. Thank you,
Okay.
Bante. Yes,
I
I would
think
like to ask.
one thing, what would be interesting to me, I'm just curious, if when people have questions, before you ask the question, say where you are speaking from. What country or city?
I'm from Malaysia.
In Malaysia now?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay, that's interesting too. Okay, please.
Yes, yeah. I would like to know these 5 precepts. Is it stated in anywhere in the sutta? Where is the origin and how does this 5 precepts come about? Is it
again, that's an interesting question. And I think I did a search for this some time ago. I have to refresh my memory, trying to see whether there is an expression. Yeah, I think I did do the search. Searching for the expression in the suttas, pancha silani or pancha silang, and I didn't find it in the older strata of the text. You don't find the expression pancha sila, but what you find are pancha sikapadani, that is 5 training principles. So these are called, and you find these quite often, just like we find them here. You find the 5 training principles laid out like this. In fact, I think in the Pali Sutta, I think it's called Panchasikapadani. Let me just do a quick look. Yeah, here, this sutta that we just looked at is called the Sikapada Sutta. So Sikapada are, Sika is training and Pada is a factor. So the factors of training. So these are the 5 Panchasikapadani, 5 factors of training. But I think the expression Panchasila as a designation for this arises at a somewhat later period. Does that answer the question? Yeah, but it's a convenient expression.
Yes, Bhante. So it's a form of like 5 training principles, and
Yeah.
There's no such so-called origin or anything that was laid down, just like the Vinaya. It comes only, like some breaches of the world and things like that.
They'll lay down just as 5 factors of training or 5 steps of training. But the expression Panchasila or Panchasilani seems to be a bit later. And the idea of the monk, even the Buddha or the monk, giving 5 precepts to somebody, again, it's a process that developed later in the tradition. In the suttas, we just see the Buddha recommending the 5 sikapada, 5 training rules, but we don't see the lay disciples coming to the Buddha and saying, please, Bhante, give us the 5 precepts. Then the Buddha says, recite after me. Panati pata veramani sikapadang samadhiyami. But don't reject that just because it's of later origin. But it's just that we don't find it as such in the oldest text. Okay, we'll move on now.
Right. So
okay.
sorry. Before moving on, just would like to know. So the 5 precepts and the 8 precepts. So the 8 precepts is like coming before the Bhante to ask for the 8 precepts, or the Buddha to ask for the 8 precepts, but not for the 5.
Okay, the 8 precepts we find in connection with the Uposita. That's the Poya day, the full moon and new moon observance days. Again, in the suttas, the Buddha just describes how the layperson, the ideal way for the layperson to observe the Uposita day. And it just says that the layperson undertakes these 8 precepts. But again, it's not described as a process by which the Buddha himself or a monastic disciple will give the 8 precepts to a lay follower. Yeah, I think maybe the text on this, if you want to look for yourself, it's an Anguttara Nikaya book of threes. It could be sutta number 70 or 71. And then almost the same sutta, you find Anguttara Nikaya book of eights. I think it could be sutta number 41 or 42. You could look that up.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Bhante. Thank you very much.
Okay. Next, Sayale Gautami. And again, please say where you're speaking from.
Yeah, Vandami Bhante. I'm right now in LA, California.
Oh, I see, in the US. Okay.
So Bhante, my question was, like, as you mentioned, the 5 Sikhapadani. So it is like, while the Buddha was explaining right effort of developing wholesome and abandoning unwholesome.
Yeah.
So should we take this 5 Sikhapadani as the minimum standard, that this should be our wholesomeness criteria?
Yeah, but generally that aspect of right effort, abandoning the unwholesome and cultivating the wholesome. Well, yeah, in the broad sense, yeah, it involves giving up the transgression of the five training principles and following the five training principles. Yeah, though actually as part of right effort, like in the formula in the Noble Eightfold Path, it applies mainly to the mental states.
Mental. Yeah.
But certainly that development of right effort with regard to the mental states sort of presupposes that one is observing the five precepts as the mode of conduct, the foundation of right conduct.
Also, Bhante, as you mentioned, like at times the teacher may criticize the pupil for the betterment, but on the part of pupil, if the if it felt harsh and you sort of go into self-doubt or something like that, then should one look upon his five precepts and morality and like I consider himself as a good person and then look into what was wrong in the conduct and correct rather than falling back to I'm a bad person.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Like criticism with regard to ethical conduct should be taken as a means to correct oneself, not to denigrate oneself.
Okay. Thank you, Bhante.
Okay. We'll move on now to Ashish
Yes, Bante. Bante, I'm speaking from Trivandrum, Kerala.
from Kerala.
Kerala, Trivandrum. Yes, it's 8:15 p.m. here.
I say in India.
In India, yes.
Wow. Okay.
Bante, I've asked this question before, but I still have a doubt. See, the first rule of destruction of life.
Yeah.
So doesn't that mean we have to actually become vegetarians? Because the thing is, see, even let's say I'm buying meat from a store, indirectly I'm, destructing life.
Yeah.
Not directly, because someone else
Yeah.
is doing it for me, but indirectly I am destructing life. So doesn't that mean in that case that we have to be strictly vegetarians in that case?
Yeah. All I could say in regard to that question is that the Buddha didn't lay down an obligation for people to be vegetarian. So
Okay.
in my own reasoning, I sort of agree with what you're saying, that particularly if you go to the store and order meat,
Correct.
yeah, you can't say that the person is I wouldn't say the person is violating the first precept, but in some way, indirectly, they're contributing to a system which involves the killing of animals, particularly the modern meat industry is just so horrific that so many millions and millions of animals are reared. They're they're cultivated, they're reared, brought up just for the purpose. As soon as they get big enough to eat, they're slaughtered.
Correct.
Yeah, so it's a terrible thing. Okay, next, Jaychao.
Swami, thank you for teaching. My name is Jaychao. I'm currently at Florida, but I'm going back to New York, Westchester, next Friday. So
Okay.
I've stayed here for half a year so far. I've been to Zhangyan Monastery all the time, actually.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
So my question is, am I working as a functional head of a department for some company? So we have a lot of social events. So in that event, cocktail party is a very normal event. I try to not to drink anything.
Yeah.
But somehow a little bit feels like awkward. So when people ask me like very directly, why don't you have a drink? This is a drinking party. How should I handle this? Should I just not to go and this will be isolated from others? But how do you like?
I would say you could just explain. I think people will understand. You could just say that I don't use alcohol, and you just have some non-alcoholic. I assume that there are non-alcoholic drinks available.
Yeah, like a margarita.
Like what?
But do I have to reveal that I'm a Buddhist?
You don't have to say I'm a Buddhist, therefore I don't use alcohol. You just say I don't drink. And I think people will understand. A lot of people now don't use alcohol.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah, just be
Bobby.
straightforward.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, next, Atanas. Okay. You could, Atanas.
Yeah, Bante, I didn't have a question. Maybe my hand is raised.
Oh, okay.
By mistake.
Okay. So next is Kylie.
Good evening, Bante.
Yeah. Where are you from?
Okay. Bante, I'm from Malaysia.
Okay.
Okay, Bante, I would like to ask, okay, for example, last time I did ask the question about vegetarian and also eating meat will encourage, if people eating meat means we will encourage others to destroy life. Okay, but I just want to ask, if let's say when I go out to eat, if they only serve vegetarian food, then I will just choose vegetarian food. If they serve vegetarian food and also meat, then I will choose meat and vegetarian. But I didn't have intention to say that I purposely want to go for meat. So is that, in that case, is it that I'm actually not actually encouraging people to destroy life? It's just that the choices provided is that there is meat, there is vegetables. Can I say it in that way?
Yeah, I don't think you have to be worried about that. Yeah, as I mentioned, I think I mentioned, was it last week or a couple of weeks ago? When I was in Sri Lanka, I wasn't vegetarian. I tried to be, but it was difficult because people would, usually they would serve fish and then later chicken. And that was the only, for a long time, that was the only source of protein. But now that I've been back in the US, now it's easy to be vegetarian here. So I could observe vegetarianism.
Okay, thank you, Bante.
Okay, I think we'll have to, we'll go on now to the next sutta. So here, and it's interesting, here we move from conduct, or at least from bodily and verbal conduct. Now we're moving, we're drawing the same distinctions between the bad person and the person who's worse, the good person and the superior person, in terms of, call these moral and spiritual qualities. So, and this is a set of 5 qualities, I think it's 5, that we often find together. I'm sorry, it's actually 7 qualities. 1, 2, 3. And the good qualities together, there's a technical term for them. They're called the 7 good dhammas. Actually, this is also interesting. I can't get the typewriter to go. Okay. Yeah, the good qualities are called the 7 Sudhammas. And here we have that same prefix. Sat, which can mean good or true, plus the word Dhamma. And here the word Dhamma is being used in the general sense of qualities or states. So, but these are 7 qualities that accord with the Dhamma as the fundamental underlying moral cosmic law of the universe. And so first we begin with a person who is devoid of these 7 good qualities and true qualities. Someone is devoid of saddha, devoid of faith. And probably when it's speaking about devoid of faith, it wouldn't be somebody maybe like an objective scientist who says, I'm not willing to believe, to accept anything on trust. But this would be the kind of person you could see who ridicules those who have faith or belief in higher spiritual values, particularly in the Buddhist context, those who ridicule and reject faith in the Buddha, in the Dharma, in the Sangha. Maybe in a Buddhist society, it could be somebody who grows up and says, you know, especially the younger people talking to their parents, the older generation, you guys are just superstitious, believing in what you think there's somebody who's enlightened, and you follow these precepts, and you respect these guys who are wearing just these brown colored robes, preaching and acting holy just to fill their bellies. They don't go out and do any decent work. So it's that kind of person. And the person will be, you can see that they're morally shameless, that they don't have a conscience that guides them in behaving in ethical ways. And they're morally reckless. Yeah, this brings us, maybe I'll deal with the distinction of these two qualities when we come to the positive side. Then they're deficient in learning. They're not interested in learning the Dhamma. So maybe they ridicule those who spend their time poring over these ancient books, thinking we have so many forms of entertainment. You could go to the shows, go to the movies, get on the internet and play computer games, or go out enjoying yourself with friends. Why you spend your time studying these teachings 2,000, 2,500 years old, or just ancient gobbledygook, ancient, what's the expression? Ancient nonsense. And then they're lazy, then muddle-minded. This is an expression which renders the Pali term, which means devoid of mindfulness. And then they're unwise, devoid of wisdom. So that's the bad person. And the one who's worse than the bad person is somebody who encourages others, let's say, who attacks the faith of others, encourages others to be skeptical, to be cynical, to give up their faith. And somebody who encourages others to give up their conscience, their sense of moral shame and moral scruples. Somebody who tries to discourage others from learning the Dhamma, and who encourages others to be lazy, to be devoid of mindfulness, to be devoid of wisdom. So that's the person worse than the bad person. Okay, then it's easier to now to explain these qualities by way of their positive counterparts. So we have somebody who's endowed with, first you see the 7 good qualities of faith, what's called moral shame. This is in Pali hiri. Moral dread is ottappa. Then learning is sutta. Then energy is virya, effort, vigor, energy. Then being mindful implies sati. And being panyava implies panya, wisdom. So those are the 7 good qualities: faith, moral shame, moral dread, learning, energy, mindfulness, and wisdom. Okay, so somebody is endowed with faith. In this context, they have faith or trust in the triple gem, in the Buddha, in the teaching or Dhamma, and in the Arya Sangha, the Sangha of the noble ones. And then they have hiri and ottappa. Yeah, these we always have difficulty finding adequate translation of these terms in English. But the Pali terms, they go together as a couple. Hiri and ottappa. So I say that hiri is the inner voice, which, you see, the Pali, the English word shame conveys as its meaning, let us say, a sense of embarrassment after one commits some kind of transgression. But the Pali word hiri is a it's a quality that chimes in before one engages in a transgression, when one is sort of tempted to overstep the bounds of ethical conduct. And it's the, let's say, it's a voice of conscience which convinces one not to overstep those boundaries. Or it's the inner voice that tells you to give up the unwholesome mental state in which one might be indulging. And this quality of hiri works on sort of the operating system behind it is one's sense of self-respect, the sense of one, I say it's the sense of one's own inherent dignity and worth, which is grounded upon one's commitment to ethical observances, to following ethical standards. And so then when one is tempted to overstep those boundaries, the voice of hiri steps in and says, do you want to stain your character? Do you want to dirty your character? Do you want to detract from your own inherent, intrinsic, potential nobility of character by acting in that way, or by yielding to those unwholesome impulses of the mind? And so in that way, hiri restrains one. And so hiri, you could say, is based on the inner voice. And ottappa is based upon fear of the consequences of transgression. So while hiri looks inwardly, ottappa looks outwardly. So one thinks, at one level, one thinks, what are others going to say if they find out? You know, here in, well, I think this has been going on over the world. We've had so many cases of powerful men, well, sometimes not always powerful, but men who sexually exploit women or abuse women or denigrate women in various ways. And they always think, because I'm in a position of power, and so the woman will be afraid to tell on me, to expose me. But over the last few years, the women have been coming out into the open and saying that so-and-so, Harvey Weissman, powerful movie producer, exploited me on these occasions. Bill Cosby, a popular comedian, did this and that. And this politician did this and that, and so on. And so this is one of the consequences. You engage in transgressions, others come out and expose you. So that's one set of consequences. Another set of consequences, not only do you get shamed in public because of one's transgressions, but if you commit some legal violation, the legal authorities find out. So you've been dealing in drugs, selling drugs, the legal authorities find out, and then you're in prison, or you set up this Ponzi scheme. What was the name? Bernie Madoff? I think he was a billionaire who used these Ponzi schemes to get rich. Then he was exposed and he went to prison. And so those are some of the consequences that one should be afraid of. And then at the deepest level, there's the karmic consequences. So of course, this presupposes that one accepts the law of karma, but whether you accept the law of karma or not, but we have to be aware of the karma consequences, that when we violate the basic ethical principles, we are creating unwholesome karma. And when that karma gets the opportunity to ripen, it's going to bring about undesirable results. And if that karma is strong enough, it could govern the rebirth process and pull us down to unhappy states of rebirth, even if it's strong moral transgression, down to the realm of the pretas, the tormented spirits, or the hell realm, the realm of extreme suffering. So that is the work of ottappa, moral dread. We abstain from unwholesome action because we're afraid of the consequences. With hiri, we abstain from unwholesome action because we want to preserve our sense of our own dignity, our own integrity. So these two go together. So they're always introduced together in the text. Okay, then the next is learning, which the way I say it, to be a good person, you don't have to be a scholar of the text, but actually the Pali word here, that's interesting. Now when we use the word learning, it implies that you've read a lot of books, studied a lot of texts. But the Pali word for sutta, the Pali word for learning is sutta, which literally is the past participle of the verb sunati, which means to listen. So in the Buddha's time, because the teachings were not written down, to learn the teachings, you have to go to listen to Dhamma discourses. And so a person who attends a lot of discourses has listened to many teachings, and in that way become sutta, become learned. And somebody who's learned a lot becomes bahusutta, highly learned, erudite, because they've listened to many teachings, bahu. Okay, then the next good quality is virya, or energy. So this is energy, not in the sense that you're bursting with energy to start a business or engage in sports and so on, but it's the energy in training the mind to eliminate the unwholesome, to cultivate the wholesome. And two of the qualities to be developed through energy are mindfulness and wisdom. And so mindfulness and wisdom arise from being energetic, and wisdom especially requires some foundation of learning, of having heard the teachings and cultivated the teachings. Okay, so those are 7 good qualities. And so the good person is one who possesses them, and the superior person is one who is not only accomplished in those qualities themselves, but encourages others to be accomplished in those qualities. Okay, maybe now we could take another round of questions, if there are any. Okay, next is Sheila James, and you.
Good morning, Bhante.
Okay, and where are you speaking from?
Yes, I am in Stockton, California.
Okay, so in the US. Okay.
Yes, and my question is, the 7 good dhammas, is that basically the 7 factors of awakening?
No, it's actually a different set. So some of these factors are included in the 7 factors of awakening, or 7 factors of enlightenment. So we do have mindfulness is the first of the 7 factors of enlightenment. And then wisdom appears in the 7 factors of enlightenment as the second of those, which is called like investigation of things, or the examination of things, or discrimination of good and bad. And then energy comes next. Yeah, so these 3 we would find in the 7 factors of awakening: energy, mindfulness, and wisdom.
Thank you.
Okay, Aili Tan.
Bante, from Malaysia.
Okay.
Yes, Bante, would like to know if this Hiri and Papa, the moral shame and moral dread, is there a boundary like everyone would agree to it, or is just that as a human in the human realm, all would agree same sets of moral shame and moral dread? Because some moral shame may not be so-called a shame to the other.
I'm not getting the question clearly, like the voice is breaking up a little over the transmission. Maybe try again.
Okay.
Okay, try again.
Yes. Yes. Is there a definitions or a boundary that is set for this moral shame and moral dread?
A boundary.
Yeah, or a definition.
A formal definition.
Yes, yes.
I think if I remember in the Visuddhimagga, one finds some definition. Yeah, I'd have to look up. It would be in chapter 14 of the Visuddhimagga. In the suttas themselves, we don't, to my knowledge, we don't find a formal definition of them.
I see, I see.
Yeah.
Okay,
That was
sure.
the question?
Yes, yes. Thank you,
Okay,
Bante.
okay,
Look at
okay.
that. Thank you.
Okay, so Wiley? And you're speaking from?
Thank you, Bante.
Yeah.
You're
from Florida?
Yes, I'm in Florida
Georgia?
right
Okay.
now.
Okay.
On Hiri, the moral shame.
Yeah.
It seems like when people use that term, they're using it in a way that might be closer to moral compass. Would that be an accurate way of putting it? Because it doesn't seem to be the sense of shame, but just the impetus toward a certain direction, just a moral compass. Would that,
Yeah,
or is that inaccurate?
Yeah, I understand. I would say that maybe the moral compass underlies Hiri.
All right.
Yeah. As I said, it's really difficult to find inadequate rendering for Hiri, and shame doesn't quite do it. And now shame has gotten bad press because the idea of shaming somebody has become widespread, where say somebody has some kind of physical defect, and then other people, or physical disability, then other people ridicule that person, so that's shaming them. But yeah, this is not what's intended, but I call it, maybe conscience would work. Or let's say conscience is more is better than moral shame. Though I started using moral shame years ago, and it's become habitual with me. But anyway, I would say definitely like a moral compass, in the sense of being pointed in the direction of moral conduct, sort of underlies moral shame. And maybe it underlies both moral shame and moral dread.
Thank you, Bante.
Okay.
And another question back on the precepts. Could it be said that the reason for observing the 5 or 8 precepts or whatever number is not ultimately about the virtue and merit gained by following the precepts, but the insight they give into, say, the 4 noble truths, the 3 characteristics, the aggregates, etc. You know, for example, you spent a lot of time working on as accurate translations as possible, but ultimately that's elusive. And that's kind of a practical application of the precept of right, truthful speech. But it ends up being elusive. So it seems the ultimate lesson is that there's only one path of complete resolution. And that our practicing the precepts is just to point us in that direction. Whereas does that seem to be missing the mark?
I say that that's a bit too limited of a perspective. I'll say that there's a number of purposes in observing the precepts.
Oh yeah.
So, okay. So the first,
I guess my expression that was a bit limited. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So the first purpose would be to maybe to preserve the sense of inner integrity and the clarity of conscience, the freedom of the mind, freedom from regrets. Another purpose would be to establish conditions for communal harmony, social and communal harmony. Another purpose from a mundane point of view is to create wholesome karma that will contribute to good rebirths and spiritual progress along the path. And then sort of within the full training, then the purpose of observing the precepts is to establish the secure foundation for the next stage of training, which is the training in adhicitta, developing the higher mind through samadhi, and then going on to develop the higher wisdom, panya. So in that way, we have sila, samadhi, panya as the three stages of the training. Okay, I see two more questions, so let's move on to Ian Chung. Yeah, you'll have to unmute. Yeah, you have to unmute. And where are you from? And where are you from? Okay, you could speak. Okay, I'm not getting a voice, even though you're unmuted. Okay, we'll come back. We'll go to Tian Xiong for now. Unmute. Okay.
Lim from Malaysia. One comment on this.
Oh, wait, who is speaking?
Lim Tian Xiong from Malaysia.
Oh, I see. Okay.
One comment on this investigation of Dharma. I would think that this investigating of the Dharma is actually mainly on the meditation aspect of it. It's more of investigating the, I call it the phenomenon during the object of the Vipassana meditation, rather than investigation of the sutta or in the very mundane sense. So I would say because the 7 factors of enlightenment is achieving the mind towards this higher state. So it's basically basing on the meditation object.
Yeah, but actually we're not really discussing here the 7 factors of enlightenment. It's just that one of the questions asked whether these 7 good qualities are identical with the 7 factors of enlightenment. So I just mentioned the correspondence. But yeah, I don't want to go sort of into a longer discussion of the 7 factors of enlightenment now. So we should sort of stay to the topic of the sutta. Okay, so Tian Xiong next. You have to unmute.
Yeah, I already asked the question.
Oh, you asked the question.
Oh,
then Ian Chung has
yes, Bhante.
Okay.
Yes,
okay.
good morning, Bhante. Yes, can you hear me now?
Yeah, and where are you speaking from?
Okay, I'm from Malaysia as well.
Wow.
You have a
I think I'm getting
strong
more
following in Malaysia, Bhante.
Yeah, I think I'm getting more Malaysian viewers than New York-based viewers. Okay, go on.
Yes, I mean you've done extremely good work, so you have big following in Malaysia.
Okay.
Okay, Bhante, actually my question is to do with hiri and ottappa.
Yeah.
You know, we always say, be mindful to guard your senses.
Right.
Okay, that mindfulness, in order to practice well, does it normally come with the hiri or ottappa? Whenever would that actually strengthen the guarding of the of whatever comes in? You know, yeah, those dangers.
Yeah, I would say that these qualities or these factors sort of work together very closely. Mindfulness works very closely with hiri and ottappa. Yeah, so
yeah.
So let us.
The reason I say is
yeah. So mindfulness.
Yeah, the reason why I say sorry, Bhante.
No, go on.
The reason I say it is because normally when they say be mindful to guide your senses, it's like just mindfulness. It is just very flat. And that hiri-ottappa, to my view, is that it is extremely important, so that you really are really aware and guard it, so that it doesn't come in. Yep.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And maybe too often this hiri and ottappa are overlooked. But the Buddha, one finds a number of suttas, we'll probably be coming to them later in the Anguttara Nikaya, where the Buddha speaks of moral shame and moral dread, hiri and ottappa, as being the ground of sila, of virtuous conduct, or let's say the roots or condition for virtuous conduct. So we have moral shame, moral dread. Out of these two qualities comes conduct that follows the precepts. And let's say mindfulness will make one then aware when states of mind have arisen that are pulling one away from observing the precepts. So mindfulness is what makes one aware, and then moral shame and moral dread will then kick in and sort of kick one back onto the path of the precepts. Yeah, does that make sense? Okay, so I think, yeah, okay, so we've I think maybe we'll stop here for the day. Maybe we'll go on next time to take the rest of these short suttas, which are, as I said, cover important territory. But I want to mention next Saturday, I won't be having the regular Anguttara Nikaya course, because I'll be starting a series of 5, or maybe it'll expand to 6 talks to Buddhists in Russia, covering fundamentals of Buddhism. But people on this call are welcome to join the course of sort of the fundamentals of Buddhism for Buddhists in Russia. It'll be over the same platform, the same Zoom platform, the same Zoom link. So you're welcome to join, and over this week, I'll send out an announcement about it. But what I would ask is that when it comes for the question period, that we give precedence to the Buddhists from Russia to ask their questions. Okay, I see Young, did you just, I see your hand just came up.
Bhante?
Yeah.
May I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So what makes some people with hiri and ottappa and make people without hiri and ottappa? Is it dependent on the origination and karma, is it?
It could be either that the tendencies are sort of carried over from previous lives. It could be through the influence of others who, particularly for children, that's why it's very important for children to be given ethical training when they're very young, so that they grow up having a sense of, let's say, a sense of right ethical conduct, so that they have a moral compass when they're children. Yeah. So the Buddha says, this is in the Mangala Sutta. How does it go? Asevana cha balanang panditanang cha sevana. So avoiding association with foolish people and associating with wise people. So it's that associating with wise people on the part of young people, especially children, that will plant the proper ethical ideals in their mind, and in that way generate or engender the sense of hiri and ottappa. Okay, we're going to have to end now. So please remember, you'll get an announcement later this week about the course that will begin for Russia. Will be like once a month. I think it's May 28th, June 11th, July 16th, and I don't remember the August and September dates. Okay, so let us close with the sharing of the merits. And if you know anybody who's going through personal difficulty, hardship, some kind of tribulation, you could share the merits with them. And then we share with the devas, the Dhamma protecting devas, and so on. Akasata Jabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Sasanam. Akasata Jabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Desanam. Akasata Jabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Mang Parang Dukkha Patachani Dukkha Baya Patachani Baya Soka Patachani Soka Hantu Sabepi Panino. Okay, so thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Bante.
Sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, Bante.
We love you,
Thank you,
Bante.
Bante.
Thank
Okay.
you, Bante.
Thank you, Bante. Bodhi.
Thank you, Bante.
Thank you, Bante.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you, Bante.
Thank you, help,
Happy
Bante.
Vesak.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Shalom, Bante.
Have a
Okay.
great day.
Okay.
Thank you, Bante.
Bante.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Much love,
Thank you. Thank you,
Bante.
Bante.
Thank you, Bante.
Thank you, Bante.
We love you.
Thank you, Bante.
Okay.
Be safe. Take care.
Okay. I'll have to
Much
end
love,
it.
Bye.
Bante.
Thank you.